I was Dean of the College of Humanities at the University of Utah, and I had started the first graduate program in environmental humanities in the country when I was there. And I was introduced to Randall because of his environmental interests as well. And we became really good friends. And he invited me to join the board. So I think I've been on the board now for probably around 15 years or so. I was kind of tangentially involved. I visited Costa Rica several times with Randall. And I was very much tangentially involved as they began to do the carbon credit offsets for the government of Costa Rica. And Randall was involved to some extent as on the advisory board of the Environmental Humanities graduate program at the University of Utah as well. So there's a bit of cross-fertilization there, essentially. And we toured some of the land that Pax had purchased in Costa Rica and then had gifted to the government of Costa Rica a few times, actually. It was my first encounter with a fertilance, the extremely venomous snake. Yeah, fortunately, no ill effects whatsoever. And we toured much of the country on a number of occasions. In fact, Randall and I would go there at least once a year for a long time. That just stopped just a few years ago, actually. And I've been very interested. Again, I haven't been directly involved in this project, but I've seen the documentary, and I've been very interested in their current project in terms of trying to eliminate the use of GMOs in Mexico. And I think the documentary is fabulous and stunning. I hope it gets a lot of attention, as it well deserves, and it's a really, very significant and important project. So it began when I was quite young. I grew up in Philadelphia in the city, kind of in a row house in a lower middle class, working class environment. And I used to take refuge often in a undeveloped area, kind of a few blocks away, that was very heavily wooded. And that's when I got interested in, insects and butterflies and, just birds and just kind of the peacefulness that taking refuge in nature would bring, particularly in a noisy city. So that kind of fascinated me. And when I went to college, I began hiking and camping a lot, and really enjoyed that as well. And that interest just grew and grew, and I began to visit national parks and do excursions to nature. My wife and I would often do our vacations at national parks or really beautiful, relatively remote places. And that interest has never ceased. It's only increased. Usually take a long walk every day with my dog, for a couple miles, and even in our neighborhood and out in the suburbs in North Carolina, I've become very attuned to the bird song and the various bird songs that surround me. And our house has become a kind of refuge because my wife spends a lot of time every day cutting up little apples and feeds the deer. And we have deer coming every night to our house, and we have a resident possum that comes every night to partake, and of course it's become a bird sanctuary as well. So it's a rather little and minor contribution as more and more development happens in this area and in all areas, and but it's a great source of comfort and stillness and quiet and listening and an opportunity of reflection as well. And I think that's increasingly what all of us require. I think the humanities have to play a central role in environmental advocacy, and also in finding solutions to what is probably the most dire problem facing all of us today, which is climate change. Um, we're seeing the cascading effects of climate change and the lessening of biodiversity. It's going to bring about widespread diasporas and famines, and not to mention the wildfires and the hurricanes that we're bearing witness to now, and their enhancement and danger, not just humankind, but to all living things. And I think it's something that should be at the top of the agenda for any thinking person today. And unfortunately, our politicians are, for the most part, denying it or postponing it. And our business people are looking at short-term solutions rather than long-term solutions to various problems. And dealing with climate change and the environmental situation requires long-term thinking, and it requires holistic thinking, not just identity and self-centered thinking. We have to think beyond just the human and think of the interwoven net of nature and how we play a part in that, and how any action that we take plays a part in it, both for good and for bad. And that kind of holistic thinking and critical thinking is very much part of the skill set and the methodology that's endemic to the humanities. So I think it's, we could have all the technological innovations on the planet, and they may indeed address some of the issues having to do with climate change. They may reduce the production of carbon, for example, or what have you. And policy solutions and political solutions, may reduce environmental injustice that we're seeing throughout the planet as well, where the less wealthy are more impacted by climate change than the wealthy, at least immediately. But in terms of that kind of holistic and long-term and legacy solution to these problems, these are really humanities questions and humanities problems. So I think that the humanities needs to be very much, in an interdisciplinary sense, involved with the science, with the engineering, with the policy people in conversations to address these things and to be part of the solution. And therefore, advocating for the humanities is just a central thing. It's also advocating for solutions to climate change. And the methodologies of ecology and the humanities have a lot of similarities. They both embrace holistic thinking. They both embrace critical thinking. They both embrace kind of solutions, finding solutions to problems. They both embrace questioning and interrogation. And probably most essentially, they both embrace the idea of bridging disparate viewpoints and disparate things that normally are not put together in new and creative ways. So I think there's an inherent strength and reciprocity and just attachment between the fundamental skill sets and methodologies and core essentials to the humanities as well as to ecology. But I think one of the ways that we address it is by expanding the way that we think about things and not thinking about things as only humans, anthropocentric, not only in terms of human identities, but that we're part of a larger whole and a very much interconnected network of all living things. Well, I think Pax Natura with its various projects is doing a really good job. And what I attempted to do is, during my 9-year term as president of the National Humanities Center, is to get the center to be more sort of public facing and outward facing, And indeed, a lot of the projects and the pedagogy, as well as the scholarship in the humanities, has become more public-facing recently as well. The National Humanities Center is best known for its fellowship program, where we basically bring about 35 scholars from all over the world. After a very rigorous competition, we get about 600 applications for those 35 positions to work on a major project each year during an academic year. And we've increasingly thought about ways to translate that scholarship, not just for other scholars and other academics, but translate the importance of that scholarship for the general public as well. So, we do podcasts. We do our conferences increasingly have been surrounding major questions of the day. We did a major conference on the humanities and climate change. We did one on the humanities and AI. We did one during the pandemic years on the humanities and healthcare. So rather than just really focusing on the esoteric, our public-facing programs, which we broadened so they're worldwide and international, and they're very inclusive. Our conferences, typically, we have representation from at least a dozen and sometimes 24 different countries, and people from all walks of life, not just humanists, but policy people, scientists, engineers, what have you, technologists, et cetera, involved in talking about solutions to major issues of the day and major problems. And I think those kinds of conversations are really, really essential because our problems are quite dire these days. So we've been happy to basically take Pax's major issues and productions and put them as part of our website and link to them so that they're more easily discoverable. So that's one of the ways that we have served as a good partner, I think, to Pax as well. And I think discoverability is really, really important. And speaking in language that the intelligent general public can comprehend rather than in jargon or academies has become really part of our mission. What I believe our public engagement mission, we have kind of three parts to our mission: the scholarly mission, our outreach to teachers across the country. We develop both programs as well as materials, curricular materials that are used by about 3 million public school teachers across the country. But we've really elevated our public engagement mission, trying to find new audiences, trying to basically demystify what we do in the humanities to those audiences, and talk about how the humanities are very much central to a life well lived, and to a democracy, and to good conversation and civil discourse, and to finding fulfillment in one's life. And we've tried to explain by using examples from all walks of life is how those moments that are transformative in our lifetimes are moments that usually emanate from or speak to the humanities. Well, let's see. I think, let me take you back to the very root word of ecology. Ecology, the whole very term, was coined in the early part of the 19th century by a German scientist named Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel had all kinds of political issues. He kind of was an early neo-Nazi, or not neo-Nazi, but early Nazi. But nonetheless, he sort of started the science of ecology. And the term comes from the Greek oikos, which means household. And I think that's really important to think about, because the earth is kind of, if we think about the earth as our household collectively, and that what's really important in maintaining a good household is good housekeeping. I think that's a really important lesson. And just like we have to be attentive in humanistic endeavors um, to uh, being thoughtful, listening carefully, um, making sure that we substantiate our arguments rather than just embracing falsehoods or throwing things out there for the sake of throwing things out there. That we have always in the humanities kind of a quest for discovering what is truthful and what does truth mean, and how do we discover truth, um, and what makes us a good person, and what makes us a good society, and how do we preserve democracy. These are all aspects that I think uh, form a connection between um, ecological advocacy and humanistic endeavors. Oh, I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I mean, I think increasingly what we're seeing is more public-facing scholarship and um, more collaborative scholarship as well, so that scholarship doesn't just always emanate from, basically the vision was kind of like a medieval monk in working in one cell on an isolated project. I mean, I think that's the sort of old-fashioned, somewhat traditional humanities. I think, and it's still important to an extent, but I think the humanities has been broadened. So we're seeking collaborations in communities increasingly. And it's not the idea of just sort of bringing wisdom to the community from the academy. It's the idea that we are collaborators and we bring wisdom to each other. And that there's a kind of co-equal partnership in that kind of public-facing scholarship. Now, I think a lot of universities haven't caught up in their academic reward systems with properly rewarding and embracing that kind of scholarship, but I think it's well on its way. The various scholarly organizations, the Modern Language Association, the American Historical Association, the American Philosophical Association, as well as the National Humanities Center, have been increasingly advocating for increased attention and embrace of and rewards for that kind of public-facing scholarship, because it yields all kinds of things. It's quite important. So that the idea of the ivory tower being the sole bastion for scholarship is a very antiquated notion now. I think enhances just the various kinds of partnerships that we can build. I mean, the universities can't exist in isolation from the communities in which they're built. They're serving those communities, and it's important for the communities to understand how important that service is, how they enhance the lives of the members of the community that are not necessarily directly affiliated with the universities. If the universities are going to survive, they need that kind of support from their communities, and they need to bring things to those communities to get that support. Well, I mean, I think the arts and the humanities need to work hand in hand so that themes about climate change are more central. So I'll go back to environmental humanities. That, as I mentioned, when I was dean at the University of Utah, I started the first graduate program in environmental humanities. That's been replicated across the country in numerous institutions now, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment. And I think the humanities has always been, with the arts, at the forefront of interdisciplinarity. And to be a vibrant academy, it's really important that we think novelly, new ways about how to transform and mutate and morph the various disciplines that we have. And that begins with interdisciplinary thinking. That's how we create new disciplines. We start with interdisciplinary achievements and interdisciplinary collaborations, both pedagogical and scholarly. So I think better and more bridges between the arts and the humanities with the sciences, and with technology and with policymakers as well, is quite essential in making these things happen. Whether it's dealing with issues of healthcare, or climate change, or what's going to happen with AI, and what are the benefits, what are the detriments of that. How do we preserve knowledge? What does culture look like in 100 years? And what do we as individuals look like as cultural beings in 100 years? These are all important questions, and it requires conversations and projects and work together with the various disciplines to achieve healthy outcomes. We've just had our national archivist fired by the president. So what do we do without a national archives, for example? And the means of preserving truth, we started with perhaps clay tablets in Mesopotamia, where people would spend a long period of time sort of carving their messages into, or their artwork, or their treatises into clay tablets, what have you. And now we've evolved, if evolution is the right term, so we have things stored in the cloud. But is that always going to be recoverable? And a lot of what's stored in the cloud is stored through sort of centralized data networks. And they could be easily interrupted or deleted, or, if there are questions about cybersecurity, et cetera, et cetera. And what's going to happen if we're not vigilant about making sure that we have both the technological means that we preserve things, so that when certain technologies become obsolete, we haven't lost these things. It's kind of like the restoration of LPs now, as to listen to. They just have a better sound than CDs did, or than your phone does. So people are trying to, rescue them and restore them. So having various sort of means to both acquire and to preserve that data, but making sure that we invest in the preservation of that data to preserve our cultures and to preserve, the various aspects of the knowledge that we create, for good and for bad. We've sent, I guess, on Voyager, that sort of golden record into space with all these different languages and all these different musical tunes, et cetera, et cetera. There's no record player that went with it. But, I guess we're assuming that whatever alien species gets that golden record can create the record player, and we have it ingrained in the record itself. I think these are all questions that we have to think about, so that we make sure our golden records, in multiple aspects, still exist 100, 200, 1,000 years from now, and our cultural aspects, for all their positive and positive and negative attributes, are discoverable. And that requires vigilance, and it requires archivists and librarians and scholars, and people that just believe in the importance of culture. I think a lot of activism has humanities-based approaches already sort of central to what we're doing. So the study of history, of course, is extremely important. So if you think about, the civil rights movement, that was a movement that was very much, or the feminist movement, or the environmental movement, what have you. These are all movements that first one has to read the literature and understand the history before one can develop positions or policy or platform. So it's not just a bunch of empty slogans with no depth whatsoever. again, if one is to make an argument, one needs to be able to substantiate adequately that argument. That's what we teach in the humanities. That's part of basic first-year composition classes. How do you prove your argument? It's basically the fundamentals of scientific research as well. Prove your argument, support it so it's replicable, so it could be empirically tested elsewhere as well. So these are methodologies that are very much central to the humanities, and I think if around every boardroom in a corporation and seated at every sort of major policy decision in Congress, we had a historian, I think we'd have better policies and better business practices. With the wealth disparity, obviously, we're in another Gilded Age. I was just reading about Billionaires Row in Manhattan, and that somebody can have $500 billion in wealth is just, to me, obscene. I think there should be a limit on how much people can have, and then the rest has to go back in the till. I mean, we're taking away, if we take away Medicaid, little kids can't go to the dentist or have their breakfast. That's just a sham. It's tragic, and it shouldn't be happening when you have people that are so rich. So I think basically any historical period will yield insights into the present. You can study the development of Plato's Academy in Athens. You can look at the development of the Romantic movement in Germany at the end of the 18th century. You can do a deep dive into the American Civil War. You could read a biography of Roosevelt or Truman or what have you, and you're going to learn all kinds of stuff, and it has reflections on our present movement. So what I always have told students is figure out what your passion is, what really interests you, what excites you, and go down the rabbit hole and see what you discover, and see where those discoveries lead you to other discoveries. If you just kind of like get into a lifestyle or a job just because you think you should and you have no passion for it, you're going to be a miserable person. So the money will come eventually. It's important that you do what has meaning for you, and a lot of how you discover what has meaning for you is by reading and investigating and thinking about what has been meaningful to others and how that has resonance for you in your lifetime now. Well, I think Pax Natura's current mission, particularly the project that it's doing against GMOs in Mexico, is very much a kind of humanities mission, because it embraces the culture of the people. It embraces food culture, which is, of course, central to all culture. I mean, our stomachs are kind of the be-all and end-all of why and what we do, and the reason for doing it, essentially. And of course, it's also an investment into the long-term health of those communities, and the long-term economic viability of those communities by the preservation of their endemic cultures. So I think that kind of project, which all revolves around environmental concerns, is the kind of project that PAX should continue to do, wherever it might be. Maybe it's in Costa Rica, maybe it's in a remote area in Southeast United States, who knows where it happens to be. But those kinds of environmental projects that enhance the culture rescue the culture, and enhance the lives of those people within that culture, I think those are really, really rewarding and important projects. What I'd like to see Pax Natura do is figure out ways in which its mission and the importance of those projects are more discoverable by more people. And I don't know what that means or how to do that necessarily, but that kind of public relations and discoverability where it gets replicated and it gets picked up more and more and more. And I think the documentary is one major step in that direction. Figuring out how the message can be brought to the masses, because it's an educational message and it's a transformative message.